Well, our panel today is about legal education and multiplicity of jurisdictions. We have three speakers. Two of the speakers are here with us today, Professor Noya Rimalt and Dr. Yofi Tirosh. The third, Professor Alon Harel from the Hebrew University. He couldn't come, and we are currently trying to reach him out on Skype. Hopefully we can hear him soon, and we will hear him through the Skype. Well, our presenters will discuss mainly the issue of gender segregation in higher education, but we hope to open the discussion later to other issues such as voluntary or semi-voluntary segregation.
אתם רוצים לעשות את זה בשיחת סקייפ, ככה, וואטסאפ כזו?
כן, נראה לי...
בוא נראה כמה זה טוב.
זה שומעים את זה מצוין.
תדבר זה גלעד או אלון?
גלעד?
היי.
אהלן.
What do you say? Daddy? We can try. Okay. Okay, Gilad, we will start in a few minutes, okay? Okay. Dr. Gilad Malach agreed to replace Professor Alon Harel in case that Alon couldn't join us later. Well, Gilad is the head of the ultra-Orthodox program in the Israel Institute of Democracy. He's also the author of the master plan of the Israeli Council of Higher Education on the integration of ultra-Orthodox students in higher education in Israel. Gilad, we wanted to hear Gilad because he can offer us a more diverse point of view. You will hear Professor Rimalt and Dr. Tirosh, and it was important for us to present other opinions as well. So we'll start with Gilad. Gilad, can you hear us?
Almost. Okay. Almost, but that's okay. I mean, if you hear me, it's better.
We hear you.
We
can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, sounds great. So I will in a few minutes. I'll try to explain my point of view regarding this issue. But let's have a start with the background of the whole situation here and the big picture of integrating the ultra-Orthodox society in the labor market, academy, army, and other spheres in the state of Israel. And the point is that around 15 years ago, policymakers from a lot of areas
Lost it.
Okay. I think, we will give up, all our sincere attempts to expose you to diverse points of view. And we'll move to Professor Noya Rimalt. Noya Rimalt is a professor of law at the University of Haifa.
Not so easy. Alon, can you hear us? Gilad. Okay, so let's try again, okay? Hello? Let me talk to you.
the internet.
Okay.
Yes.
Keep
going.
Okay.
כן, אפשר, גדי, אפשר כבר בלי תמונה, כמו שיופי אומרת, פשוט להתקשר אליו ולשים על ספיקר. ממילא אנחנו לא רואים את הפרצוף שלו.
Intractable, like so much else.
Okay. So we'll wait a few minutes to see if Gilad... Okay, I will present Noya. Her scholarship examines the intersections of gender, law, and feminism in both legal theory and practice. She has written numerous articles on issues such as female offenders, sexual harassment, gender and multiculturalism, women in the military, female conscientious objectors, motherhood and law, political empowerment of women, abortion, and gender equality in the workplace. Her book, Legal Feminism from Theory to Practice, The Struggle for Gender Equality in Israel and the United States, was published in 2010. Professor Rimaut joined the University of Haifa Law Faculty after serving as the founding director of the first civil rights legal clinic in Israel. In recent years, she was a visiting professor at Georgetown University, American University, and the University of Toronto. She is the co-founding director of the Center of Gender, Law and Policy. Thank you, Noah.
Okay, so thank you for this very generous introduction. The title of my presentation is Toward a Dynamic Understanding of Multicultural Policies. And I don't know how much you know about it, but briefly I would mention that exactly a year ago, the Israeli Council for Higher Education, the CHE, approved its second five-year plan on the subject of increasing accessibility to higher education for the ultra-Orthodox population. The basic assumption of this plan is that the only way to make academic education more accessible to the ultra-Orthodox publics is through the creation of academic programs that operate under conditions of strict gender segregation. In such programs, ultra-Orthodox men and women study on different campuses or at least in separate classes, and only male instructors teach in men's classes. Gender-segregated BA and MA programs geared toward the ultra-Orthodox publics have been operating with the approval of the CHE for almost 2 decades. The official stance of the CHE on this subject is that religious and cultural considerations mandate the creation of such programs, given that the vast majority of ultra-Orthodox men and women will not study in regular academic programs. The gender inequality inherent in the structure of these programs is thus justified as unavoidable and necessary for protecting both the right to culture and equal opportunities of the ultra-Orthodox minority and the state's interest in promoting the socio-economic mobility of a minority group who has long been drastically underrepresented in higher education. The official advancement of gender-segregated academic programs for the ultra-Orthodox community constitutes yet another stage in the spread of gender segregation in the public sphere in Israel. Until around 2 decades ago, segregation between men and women was a practice that was primarily restricted to the intra-communal realm of the ultra-Orthodox community. With that, beginning in the late 90s, gender segregation spread into new realms in the public sphere. It was also transformed into an issue that law legitimizes in some contexts, and state institutions take active role in regulating and enforcing. So just to give you an example, the law for the prevention of discrimination in products and services that was enacted in 2000 permits the operation of gender-segregated frameworks in the realm of private services, wherein the lack of gender segregation might prevent some members of the population from accessing these services. Similarly, in 2011, a Supreme Court decision legitimized the practice of voluntary gender segregation in public buses, and this decision also mandates state assistance to these practices by opening the back door of the bus for women to board, thus enabling men and women to board the bus separately and to preserve gender segregation within the bus, men in the front and women in the back. The institutionalized spillover of gender segregation to new realms in the public and academic spheres over the past decades can be best understood through examining changes within the liberal rights discourse and the rise of the multicultural position, that shifted the focus from a discourse of individual rights to a discourse of group rights. As you all probably know, the classic view of multiculturalism grew from clear liberal pretense, and it is based on the claim that the right to cultural protection for minority groups in society is a necessary derivative of the liberal rights discourse. The claim is that minority cultures are not sufficiently protected by ensuring the individual rights of their members, and therefore these cultures should be protected as part of a broader concept of group rights. According to this view, membership in a cultural or religious community is a precondition for the formation of individual identity, and this membership also provides members of the relevant minority community with a supportive cultural context in which they can realize their autonomy and arrive at meaningful decisions in every segment of life. Hence, as part of this theoretical vision, law and culture are defined in binary terms, and the role of law is restricted to deciding whether safeguarding an existing cultural space is in line with multicultural principles. Moreover, inherent to this premise is a monolithic and one-dimensional perception of minority culture that enables the law to clearly identify the group and its culture. Curiously, despite the immense impact that multicultural position has had on the formation of multicultural policies in Israel as well as in other Western countries, there is hardly no academic work that analyzes the practical implications of multicultural policies with reference to specific case studies. In other words, the questions such as what happens in practice when law intervenes and protects cultural practices is hardly explored or discussed. My work on multicultural policies in Israel focuses on this question and explores the various consequences of legal intervention in the name of cultural preservation. In this context, I suggest developing what I term a dynamic understanding of multicultural policies. Specifically, I argue that the actual formation of specific infrastructures and the enforcement of specific multicultural policies possess dynamic aspects in that they not only respond to existing predetermined needs of a given minority group, but also impact the formation and transformation of these cultural needs and modes of behavior. To understand the essence of this claim, I want to discuss briefly the finding of a study I conducted several years ago, which investigated and analyzed the processes that led to the development of segregated bus lines for the ultra-Orthodox community, what I mentioned earlier. My study, which was based primarily on an analysis of official documents, public committee reports, court records, Knesset committee protocols, media reports, and etc., uncovered the way in which the very creation of infrastructure for segregation in public buses in the late 90s reshaped the ultra-Orthodox community's bus riding practices and had an effect on its attitudes on this issue. Prior to the late 90s, all of the public bus lines that served the ultra-Orthodox population were operated as gender-integrated buses. On all of these bus lines, ultra-Orthodox women and men boarded through the same door and sat together throughout the bus. My study revealed that intra-communal efforts to convince men and women from the community to voluntarily segregate themselves according to gender on public buses were not successful. The change ultimately took place only after public policy was altered, and public bus companies began to provide the ultra-Orthodox community with buses that bore signs reading ultra-kosher lines, and in which the back door opened for women to board separately. This change in infrastructure not only impacted the practical boarding and sitting habits of the ultra-Orthodox population, it also affected the amount of support for segregated bus lines within this community. As I already mentioned, my central conclusion in this context is that these processes should be analyzed through a prism of a dynamic understanding of multicultural policies that recognizes the potential dynamic effects of multicultural policies on the actual cultural boundaries and cultural interpretation of minority groups. More recently, I expanded my analysis to the development of gender-segregated academic programs for the ultra-Orthodox. The comparison between the public bus lines and the special academic programs for the ultra-Orthodox is intriguing, as both represent new forms of gender segregation. As I already mentioned, segregated bus lines have only been operating since the late 90s. Similarly, academic studies are something new for most members of the ultra-Orthodox community. Hence, in both instances, we're not focusing on traditional ultra-Orthodox realms, but rather examining the development and spread of gender segregation to new realms in the public sphere. In line with my research interest in exploring the practical implications of multicultural policies, I focused my study on the empirical argument of the Council for Higher Education. Recall, at the base of the current policy regarding the integration of the ultra-Orthodox into academia stands an empirical assumption that is supplemented by a normative position. The empirical assumption conceptualizes gender segregation as a core component of the ultra-Orthodox community's way of life that dictates their mode of participation in every forum in the public sphere. The normative position builds on the conceptualization of gender segregation as predetermined and static religious and cultural need to require state protection and preservation of what is perceived as the ultra-Orthodox minority's right to culture. In a way, it's like a two-story building. The bottom floor is the existing cultural need, and the top floor is the right-based argument that dictates state protection of established cultural needs and practices. Clearly, the second floor depends completely on the stability of the first floor. If the issue of need becomes questionable, the right-based argument collapses. So I decided to put the normative question aside and to explore the need-based assumption. I should just add in this context that the normative question is the center of a very heated debate right now. There is a petition pending before the Supreme Court that Yofi is responsible for. Yofi is leading almost a heroic battle for several years now against these gender segregated programs. So. And the primary focus, of course, is the normative question, focusing on the clash between the right to culture and the right to gender equality. Now, I do have a clear position on the normative issue. I think that gender equality should always prevail. But what I argue is that a critical analysis of relevant data in this context highlights that we don't necessarily need to get to the second floor, as the first floor is shaky in the sense that there is a real question mark regarding the need argument. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to discuss my findings so far regarding the development of these academic gender segregated programs. So I was asked to speak for no more than 10 minutes. So I might be able to elaborate more during the Q&A discussion. And to give you several examples that demonstrate my point, I was just highlight one. I mean, as a food for thought, I would give one example, a very telling example in this context. And I think what is really intriguing, one of the intriguing factual aspects of this whole story, is the comparison between the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel and in the United States. I don't know how much you know about the ultra-Orthodox community in the United States, but what is the real line of distinction is that the involvement of the state. While state regulation is very intense in the Israeli context, the state is not involved at all in the American context. And what we see in practice is two communities that operate completely differently. So just to give you several details. For example, in Israel, we have a mandatory draft to the army. If you want, as an ultra-Orthodox man, if you want to avoid the draft, you have to stay in a yeshiva for years, study Torah. And as long as you remain in the yeshiva, so you get exemption from the draft. So ultra-Orthodox men don't participate in the labor market. They stay in the yeshiva until a relatively old age. The state of Israel provides a form of a stipend that pays for their studies as long as they are there. So at the bottom line, we have about 80% of all ultra-Orthodox men in Israel staying in the yeshiva for very long years, as opposed to less than 20% of American ultra-Orthodox men. In addition, the rate of labor market participation for ultra-Orthodox men in the States is very high. The state doesn't, as I said, there are no, men have to be the breadwinners in the family. To participate in the labor market, you have, very often you need higher education. So if you would compare the percentage of ultra-Orthodox men and women who have academic degrees in the States and in Israel, we realize that without state-funded academic programs for the ultra-Orthodox, American ultra-Orthodox have 5 times more academic degrees compared to the Israeli context. I could go on, but I think I'll stop here, and I'll just say that in conclusion, and this might be a starting point for our discussion later, my central insight is in this context is that there is a very thin and often unnoticed line between the theoretical ideal of legal preservation of cultural practices and the actual operation of multicultural policies that in practice nurture, enable, expand, and even reshape these practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Noya. We will hear now Dr. Gilad Malaf, hopefully. We don't have more technological problems.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry for the technological segregation that we cannot see you when we are.
Okay. Lotem, may I?
Yes.
Okay, take 2. Okay, so I started to talk about the big picture about the challenges regarding the ultra-Orthodox society, and I mentioned the fact that 15 years ago, let's say all the decision makers regarding head of the army, defense ministry, vocational training, economy ministry, treasury ministry, they all understood that we have a problem. What do I mean when I say we have a problem? There are two main problems. The first problem is, first of all, the phenomenon that the ultra-Orthodox society, especially men, doesn't work for their living. Most of them didn't work at that time. The result was the fact that both they were, it became a very poor society. But the second thing, which was more important for decision makers, was the fact that it started to affect the whole state of Israel, the economical and the future prosperity of the state of Israel. So I can say simultaneously, all the bodies that I mentioned earlier, they all understood that the main way to integrate the ultra-Orthodox society in the labor market and the academy and the army is connected to cooperation, and if I refer to the main tools in the public policy, meaning the carrots and they prefer to choose carrots instead of making a fight. There were some elements, some trying to make a fight, like the time when Yair Lapid was the treasury minister, and the result was that regarding, for example, the army, there was a reduce the number of people who entered the army. So what was the main key, the main tool of how to integrate them? The main tool is what I call integrative enclave. What do I mean? I mean that the state built in the army, in the academy, in vocational training, in advice centers, built an enclave, a new enclave, meaning that the Haredi society will be there by themselves, separately, men and women, and will have the ability to enter to a process of integration. And this is a very important point. This is a phase. The enclave or the units, special units in the army, or special departments or special campuses in the academy, or in vocational training, or in advice centers, are a phase when they move from their enclave, totally enclave sphere to integration. And we see the results that most of them, after being in the army or in the academy, they are integrating in the regular labor market. Now, specifically regarding the academy, we know that there are some prices that we need to pay for that. And especially when we refer to values in the academy of totally freedom, equality between men and women, there are prices. Now, first of all, I want to refer, when I deal with these prices and policymakers had to decide, there were two options. Whether to keep the rules, the existing rules in the academy, mostly, meaning that it's people studying together, men and women, and also lecturers, but the result was a lack of opportunities, equal opportunities for the ultra-Orthodox. Because I'm sure, and all the decision makers, when we checked it again and again and again, we understood that there might be 80% or 75%, but at least 70% won't go to such an academy if there is no separation between men and women. Now, the point is that the whole academy in Israel has changed. The model of the academy has changed in the last 20-25 years. What was the main change? The basic concept of the academy in Israel was the Humboldtian one, the German Humboldtian academy as a place of pure research, and that was the main way that the academy was in Israel until the beginning of the 90s, meaning that the main course for the academy is research. And connected to that are values of free research and things like that. But the point is that the whole academy in Israel has changed in the last 20 years. And dozens of colleges were opened that their main interest, their main course is to make a vocational training. And the fact why ultra-Orthodox also goes to these places is for vocational training. But nowadays, the labor market needs the certificate of bachelor degree, so they function that way. And this is the reason why the level of the colleges in Israel has changed. And everybody knows that there is a great difference between universities and colleges in Israel. And 90% of the ultra-Orthodox go to these colleges and get these degrees, and this is the way, this is the context why when we say that there is a compromise, why is it reasonable? Because it's connected to a great change that has happened in the academy. Two more things that I will say before leaving. I'm sorry, I'm teaching at 2 o'clock. One thing regarding options of women, Haredi women, the fact that there is a separation between women and men. There is a claim that it makes lecturers, especially secular lecturers, women secular lecturers, to teach because they don't have the ability to teach men because of religious reasons. This is hypothetically. This is in theory. It's not in reality. Why it's not in the reality? Because 70% of the students are women. So most of the classes, most of the courses are with women. So practically we don't have a problem. Theoretically we have a challenge, but we prefer, and decision makers prefer the solution to real problem instead of giving a solution for theoretical thing. And another thing is that although the compromises, the fact that I, for example, as a teacher that taught in Ono College, in other colleges, and I taught them political science, and for the first time, men and women, they heard point of view, let's say secular or academic point of view regarding this crucial question, and the fact that they read the material and they met academic point of view, this makes for a great change in the ultra-Orthodox society, and the results are that more than 12,000 students today, Haredi students, are studying in the academy, and this process will continue to go on.
Gilad, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry that I'm running to my lecture.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you everybody. Bye.
Well, Gilad just received Karin's call yesterday night. He didn't prepare himself, but he was so kind.
Yeah, we wanted a physical man to be actually in the room because the Professor Alon Arel from Hebrew University could not make it. But now we are going to get 2 virtual men on the phone. So sorry about that.
That's okay.
You know, when you invite men to panels as opposed to women, men can sometimes bail out. You know, they have a commitment issue, see? But we, on principle, we didn't want to have only a female-dominated, you know, a panel in this particular topic, but unfortunately this is what we can have, but hopefully our next speaker also will do a good job.
Okay.
But he's really, I mean, if you didn't understand, he's the voice of the establishment. He's a researcher, but his research provided the data and the relevant findings for the Council for Higher Education. So the Council for Higher Education really relies on his research to support the current structure of gender segregated programs.
He wrote the master plan for the gender segregated programs of 5 years last year.
Yeah, right.
Well, we will hear now Professor Alona.
Just an important remark. Haredi and ultra-Orthodox mean the same things, are interchangeable words, okay? Haredi and ultra-Orthodox, the same thing. Alon?
Alon?
Yeah.
Alon, do you hear us? Okay. So Professor Alona Harel is the Philip and Estelle Mizok Chair in Administrative and Criminal Law and a member of the Center of Rationality at the Hebrew University. Professor Harel is the author of Why Law Matters, published by Oxford University Press in 2014. Alon, we will start now.
אלון, רק תוכל להגביר, לקרב את הטלפון?
שלך על מקסימום?
לא, עדיין לא, חזק יותר.
בטח. יותר קרוב?
Hello.
Can you hear us?
אלון, תוכל להגביר קצת את הקול?
אני אוריד את המיקרופון, עכשיו זה יותר טוב?
כן, יותר טוב, כן.
Yeah, a bit better. Now resort to English, okay? Because everybody listens.
Okay, I've written on gender segregation in buses in Israel, and I expressed the opinion that gender segregation in buses can be legitimate if it doesn't reflect badly on women, if it doesn't convey humiliation or certain negative sentiment. I think the issue of education is more complex, and let me present my position on this. I think that in this respect I may disappoint the organizers. I think that the universities should not conduct classes, separate classes for men and women. And the reason is, in my view, pedagogical or educational. I think that this is very important that women will hear the perspective of men and men will hear the perspective of women on various issues. The Hebrew University wanted at some point to have separate classes for ultra-Orthodox and in the social, I guess, social services department. I don't know how they call it here. And I thought this is atrocious. This is atrocious because you cannot speak about questions like abortion and prostitution and how to help women and men when you have only men or only women in the class. At the same time, I think that when you go to other institutions of higher education, which are not as sophisticated and as developed as advanced as universities, such as colleges, that are more aimed at providing kind of technical qualifications, I think that, and they already have separation of men and women. So I think there are very good reasons, both symbolic as well as educational, not to extend the separation of men and women or separate classes to the university. At the same time, I think that with respect to the colleges that provide technical education or professional education that is on a lower level and is aimed directly at providing people education that would enable them to be integrated into the workforce, into the labor market. I think it is reasonable to conduct separation in order to facilitate the integration of large chunks of the Israeli population into the system. The reason I think the universities ought not to endorse it has to do with two things. First of all, with the quality of education and the quality of professionalism required of people. So I want ultra-Orthodox who decide to go to colleges to know that they miss on the quality of education. They miss something, they miss an experience which is very important, and they miss on the quality of education
because they are unwilling to get into classes that are mixed. I also believe that there is a symbolic or expressive ideal in the higher echelon of the higher education system, in the sense, precisely as yeshivas do not accept women, this is part of their ethos, that only men study the Torah. I think it's part of the ethos of university that men, women, and every person of every race should participate as an equal member of the academic community. But I think there is a symbolic issue in university which requires the universities not to endorse separation. So it's both educational and, I guess, ethos-related reasons. I wish only to end by making one observation, which I think is quite important. We have at the Hebrew, I think in every university, we have what is called in Israel mechina, namely educational classes for people who do not do the matriculation test or want to improve their matriculation grades and want to enter into the university. And we have had separate classes in this sphere, in this program, for a very long time. I think for a few years. And in one of these classes, they distributed a questionnaire at the beginning of the class and at the end of the class. They asked the students, that were all ultra-Orthodox, they asked the students, would you be willing to learn in mixed classes? The change during this period was dramatic. In the beginning of the period, very few were willing to study in mixed classes. At the end of the class, which was separate, I emphasize, this class was separate, with men and women separately. Their willingness to study in mixed classes increased dramatically, which suggests that even when you have, which may suggest, I don't know, but which may suggest that even if you have separate preparatory classes for the university, even if they are separate, the mere existence of such classes in the university, which is a mixed environment, the mere presence at the university, and perhaps even the values that are being taught at the mechina, at this program, are ones that make the ultra-Orthodox more willing to endorse the value of the academic values of equality between men and women. This is just a suggestion for thought. I would be very happy to hear any of your questions.
Thank you, Alon. Do you want to open for questions now for Alon?
No.
I can't hear you.
Okay, because Alon has to go. Okay. Do you have any questions for Alon, because he has to go really soon?
I do.
Okay.
My name is Timothy Fisher. I'm the Dean of the University of Connecticut Law School. Has there been experimentation with using video lectures where a woman professor gives a lecture through video to a male audience?
I don't know of any experiment of this kind, but you have to remember one thing, that the condition that the university imposed on separation between men and women in the classes was that women lecturers could teach, and this was at least in the proposal at the Hebrew, it was clear that women could teach a male audience and vice versa. It is only that the body of the students would be separated. It's not everywhere, but this was the condition of the university. By the way, the proposal to have mixed teachings was not accepted by the university. The Senate rejected it to the overwhelming majority. So at the Hebrew, at the moment, there are no separate classes in the academic program itself, as opposed to the China program, as opposed to the preparatory class.
And
I don't
thousands
know
of
of
students
any attempts
studied
to
in
use
Open U
videos
in Israel.
in this case. So I have no clue.
Anyone?
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
Hello, this is Anita Allen from the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
You know, in the United States, we obviously distinguish between research-intensive universities and colleges and universities that are not research-intensive, but we don't make a distinction between the notion that universities must be open to all under conditions of equal opportunity, but maybe colleges don't because their mission is one of helping people to find jobs. Instead, I think we tend to argue that all workers, that the whole workforce needs to be diverse, multicultural, and culturally competent. And therefore, we want our nurses, our cooks, our house cleaners, our secretaries, all of our workers, not just the academic and intellectual elite, to be very comfortable with people of other backgrounds. And we see college and university both as places where, and technical schools as well, by the way, as places where our citizens become more able to participate in a democratic society through learning with people of different genders, races, cultural backgrounds, etc. Could you just illuminate for me why, for you, the distinction between college and university seems so important and so salient in thinking about these issues?
Right, it's an interesting observation. First of all, in the U.S., as far as I know, there are black universities. I know that except also white. There's Howard University, which I gather is black, and I think there are other universities that emphasize or primarily of one ethnic group. Am I wrong on this?
They don't discriminate. They're
I know that
historically
Howard
predominant.
University does accept whites, but I guess the ratio is dramatically, or the student body is dramatically there. But with respect to your question, I would ideally, I think that we ought to have a mixed workforce everywhere. At the same time, there are pragmatic considerations that constrain our ability to bring it about. And I believe that in the long run, ultra-Orthodox who get a technical education will be able to, and will find themselves in positions in which they will have to, in places that are mixed, in the long run, they will integrate and will be able to work in a mixed environment. At the same time, and nurses do it all the time, and there are many ultra-Orthodox nurses, and doctors, medical doctors. But at the same time, we have to overcome this transitory period in which many are unwilling to study in mixed environment, and many find it very difficult, primarily men, but not only men. So I agree with you. I mean, there is this ideal notion of what workforce could become, and there is the temporary, I hope temporary, constraint on our ability to bring it about. So I would want, in the long run, and I think ultra-Orthodox in the long run, that would find that the best jobs and the best opportunities exist in mixed environments, they will go there. But they first have to get the basic education and the basic professional background. The reason I think universities ought to retain mixed classes has to do both with the ethos of research. I think it emphasizes ideals of quality even more than in other contexts, and the fact that I think that the quality of education that can be given in separate environments is inferior to that can be given in a mixed environment.
Thank you, Alon. More questions
Yes.
for Alon? Alon, thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you very much, and I wish you, and I'm sorry I couldn't come and be present there.
Thank you, Alon.
Well, our next speaker is Dr. Yofi Tirosh. She's a member of the Tel Aviv University Faculty of Law and currently is the head of the Sapir Academic College of Law in the southern region of Israel. She's an expert of anti-discrimination law and law and culture, focusing on the legal meaning of gender and the body. Her article, Diminishing Constitutional Law, the first 3 decades of women exclusion education in Israel, is forthcoming at ICON, the International Journal of Constitutional Law. Tirosh is also a leading activist against sex segregation in Israel. A petition she has been leading against segregation on academic campuses is currently pending at Israel's High Court of Justice.
Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. So mine is sort of a presentation that cannot be anything but a mixture of my perspectives, both as someone who thinks long and hard on equality and gender equality, specifically as an activist, and recently in the past 8 months also from what I see about higher education as a dean. So let me share some thoughts with you. The first thing I want to say is that I arrived into investing a lot of time and my name and my energy in this issue, not so much from being concerned about academia per se, but from recognizing a much larger phenomenon that Noya mentioned of Israel undergoing a fascinating change that has to do with the shift in the positions of different groups within it. Very, very briefly, we've heard a lot about the ultra-Orthodox in Israel that have been undergoing, we're talking 10-15% of the population, there are 7 kids on average. The men do not study any what we call core studies, so math, geography, English. They mostly either work in very low-paid, low-status jobs or live on welfare. They are isolated by will, and they have become recently more tired of poverty, more keen on being exposed to the outside world. They're officially, for example, not allowed to have a smartphone, but the statistics says that every ultra-Orthodox person has a kosher phone, which is a phone that can only call, like the phones we used to have with a wire to attach to the wall, and a smartphone that they're inadmittedly using for social networking, reading blogs, newspapers, etc., etc. And that has brought a kind of a thirst to come out. To that, you need to add the government's will that Gilad Malach very well represented of decreasing the inequality, the Gini index, one of the most participating groups in the Israeli labor force is ultra-Orthodox men. The other one, by the way, is Arab women. And so the government thought long and hard, how do we do that? How do we increase the participation? Then there's this whole issue of fairness that was very big here on participating in the military. And what you have, to put it very, very simply but correctly, is a new challenge. And the challenge is, if ultra-Orthodox men want to enter generally for the first time general spaces, that requires being alongside women in everyday situation. In the classroom as students, in the classroom as a female professor teaches me, at the office, at the military, and here we have reached an intersection where we need to figure out, okay, so what do we do? Okay, who do we accommodate? How do we accommodate? How do we imagine women in a society that has always told itself stories about the pioneers and Golda Meir and all the paratroopers and the pilots and the heroes and the Nobel Prize chemist winner and this and that and the other. And so that's one version of the question. And so far, as you can guess, I think we have been taking the wrong calls, and we have not been answering to ourselves honestly enough, where is it going to take women in Israeli society? The other group that hasn't been mentioned so far is the group of what in the US would be parallel to modern Orthodox, in Israel is Zionist religious, that have always been part of the everyday infrastructure in Israel, always been scientists and in the media, etc., but in the past 15 years, there is also inside this community an urge to take more central elite positions in every elite area of life in Israeli society, high tech, the military, academia, media, art, you name it. And there too, such problems, not as often and not as harshly, but such problems begin to emerge, and in the military it's a big drama these days that I'm unfortunately also involved with, where you have interpretations of what is appropriate modesty that are misogynistic, and they really, and you know, I hate to equate Israel, when you equate it to Iran or to Saudi Arabia, you come out as the hating and like otherizing Iran, but when you get a command that says female soldiers cannot dress with a white t-shirt because that might show something, or they can't sing in the dining hall, or they can't show an exercise in the when they're the sports instructor, if there's a religious soldier, they cannot illustrate the exercise. They have to verbally describe it to a male soldiers to demonstrate, because it's immodest, etc., etc. So you can see that those problems emerge also there. Now, before I get to academia, I'll also say that the dynamics is such that because of the outward movement inside the communities, the leaders are worried, and they're worried that they'll lose control on their community members. And like happens everywhere in the world, and anybody here that you know has read Susan Waller-Okin or whoever knows, the pulling back is on the bodies of women, and on the requirement of women to hold the torch of modesty, of segregation, of domesticity, of motherhood, etc., etc. And so we're seeing phenomenon like, if you're in second grade today in a Zionist Orthodox school, usually you already study separately, which wasn't the case 20 years ago. And in the graduation party, the fathers are required not to come to the party because the second grade girls may sing, and that is not modest enough. So you sexualize girls like you haven't before ever. So this is to say why, when I heard for the first time sometime in 2013 that this is going on in Israeli academia, and it was under the radar, universities and colleges have hidden it. They have taken the challenge of the higher education offer, you know, we'll give you loads of carrots, loads of budgets, and you take on the challenge of teaching the ultra-Orthodox. They have taken it because they were dried out of budgets, not just because it was like a pioneering, exciting thing. And neither the Higher Education Council nor the universities and colleges, generally, except for Hebrew, basically, have held an open discussion of what this means for higher education, what this means for Israeli society in general. Zero deliberation. It was all about the budgets and the courses, etc., etc. Now, before I go on, I want to unpack, you say in the US, right? One question that probably bugs you, which is, hey, but why are we really worried? Why is it so horrible that, you know, men and women study separately? We have women's colleges. Is that, I mean, it's not good for Hillary Clinton. It's good for Hillary Clinton. It's not good for us. And if I take the separate but equal part, can the separate be equal? I'll divide my analysis into two. A, in effect, women are far from being equal in the education that they're getting. The ultra-Orthodox women are far from being equal in the education that they're getting. Maybe, Karin, you can scroll down in the mouse there, or this is the class divided by a divide. Here you see a Haredi campus where the sign says that on Sunday, Wednesday, Friday, the entrance is only for men, and on the other days it's only for women. Now that means that if you're a woman and you want to come on Sunday to write your paper in the library, you're not allowed to do so. It's less so the opposite, because a man is not kind of polluting the space as similarly. Can you go down a little bit more? Here we see a modesty sign that says that if you come to the campus with no socks for women, then you cannot take the exam, okay? And you have modesty supervisors in women's campuses in Israeli academia today. Can you go down some more? This says that a campus that's temporarily divided not by days or by campuses, but by hours. So it says that until 3:25 p.m., these are women's bathroom, and from 3:30, these are men's bathrooms. So this is another very physical way to just kick you out, because if you work in the library and you can't go to the bathroom, you just go away. And this, I'll talk about this picture later. So this is not only why the separate are not equal. The professions, the programs that are offered to women and to men are justified by different demand. Women are often pink-collar subjects, and men are offered, you know, computers, geography, whatever, economics, etc., etc. So it's not the society that the Council of Higher Education in other arms so, you know, hardly tries to encourage women scientists and women in the exact sciences, etc., etc. Here it says, and we ask, you know, what are you doing to equalize the offer of programs? And they say simply, we're not concerned. It's a matter of demand, okay? The grants and fellowships are not the same, because women do not interest the government. They already work. So they give all the financial funding, or most of it, to the men. Now, we're all lawyers and we can think analytically. Even if everything was equal, and even if women would get even more than the men, my thesis is, and this is what we're arguing in the Supreme Court, that in a society where gender is not like who eats apples and who eats pears, right? It has a meaning, and the meaning it has both in the secular community and in the ultra-Orthodox community is a very, very heavily reifying stereotypical notions of what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman. You cannot argue, like in Plessy, that, you know, the badge of inferiority stuff is in your head, okay? And I say Plessy in purpose, because often the arguments that I hear, including from the Minister of Education and from the Minister of Justice in Israel, are let the sexes live as they prefer. You know, it's exactly like let the races, you know, this is what's comfortable for them, so let them do it. Now we cannot ignore that even if, you know what, I'll get to it in a minute. One question we should, you know, leave aside as a footnote, because I don't have time to get into it, is why don't we see it as such an abomination to our intuition, our moral intuition, when we see sex segregation, like when we see race-based segregation? And that's a big part of what's going on here. People will be shocked in Israel if it was like Sephardic versus Mizrahi, okay, in different classrooms, but not as much. It's not pretty, but it's not as, you know, appalling. Okay, so one justifying paradigm that we've seen, or we've heard here from Gilad Malach, is the neoliberal one. We have to do it. It's all about market utility. There is no way around it. Gilad said, though, there were two options on the table. Either do this or let things remain as they are. Alon mentioned a third option that the Hebrew U did very, very boldly, and they said, in the preparatory year, we will give ultra-Orthodox opportunity to study separately. There's also an academic justification because the women do high school exams, like graduation exams, and they have math and English, etc. And if you do that, and then you say to them, okay, this is a very good university. Welcome. We'll give you orientation. We'll give you a holiday consideration that are not on our book, like fasting days. We'll give you a very, very, very kosher cafeteria, etc., etc. But there's one thing we can't give you. We cannot move the women aside because it's not our, it's not academia and it's not democracy and it's not Israeli society. Let's see what happens. And what happens is they come. Now, if Gilad was here, we would say, but, very, very few, a few dozens each year. It's not the thousands that we have in other campuses. But of course, the question of what is the data about preference and choice that we rely on, just like Noya showed, is very malleable. So it's really amazing. The one survey that everyone relies about, Gilad mentioned it, it's a survey that says that only 20% of the ultra-Orthodox are willing to come and study with others, and the Council of Higher Education has been waving this, scaring everybody off for years, and it's the same survey that recently has served the civil service in Israel to start an all-male ultra-Orthodox course for civil service cadets, okay? And we, after many, many struggles, managed to receive the raw data of the survey and analyze it by statisticians that I collaborate with. And what we found was, hey, yes, out of all the ultra-Orthodox they asked, it's 20%. But the biggest hurdle, the biggest block is unwillingness in principle to go to academia, okay? If you look at only the group that said, we are willing to go to academia, the number rises to 40%. And this is a number that was there when the option of studying in segregation existed. We all know that preferences are adaptive, and if this option was not on the table, it was academia, yes or no, maybe the answer would have been different. Okay, the other justifying paradigm that Noah talked about a lot is the multicultural one, and it is indeed appealing, but I don't have time to explain why it does not apply to our case. What Will Kimlicka and what Avishai Margalit and Moshe Halbetan and many other thinkers were seen in front of their eyes when they thought about multiculturalism is not the Israeli case of the ultra-Orthodox. It's not the same cultural, religious, ethnic schism. They have huge political power. A lot of the marginalization is by choice, at least of their leaders, and most importantly for my case, when you read about those cases, the Peyote case, the turban in Canada case, etc., the question, there are two prices that the liberal society has to pay, okay? One is to be tolerant to hurting minorities within the insular group, right? It's about whether we intervene with polygamy or with female genital mutilations, etc., etc. But it's about their women, and then we talk about ideas like an exit opportunity, etc. Or we pay with a little bit of tolerance to break in our own rules, as in the helmet motorcycle case or in the Peyote case, etc. Never in any of those examples, what you have on the table is a price that the secular or the majority, the hegemonic women has to pay in order to accommodate and tolerate, etc., the illiberal practices, and women in Israel have to pay those prices today, and they're paying them more and more by the month. Another justification is, well, indeed, and this has been said both by Alon and by Gilad, In this is not pretty, yet it's essential and it's temporary. Gemalach talked about integrative enclaves that are a phase in the integration. Alon Harel said we have to overcome this transitory period. In the beginning of this process in 2012, the Council of Higher Education has promised and vowed and wrote in all its documents that this is indeed temporary and confined. It's only going to be offered, the segregation is only going to be allowed for the first degree, not secondary, not PhD level, only to ultra-Orthodox people that are by very, very specific tests about what high school they graduated from. And of course, the whole imaginary scenario was give them that, this will be like a soft landing, and then they'll go to the labor force and everything will be fine. What has been happening since is there are immense pressures to offer sex-segregated second degrees, and these pressures are going to work, okay? There are more, I don't know how to call it, there's a hybrid group in Israel between modern Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, it's called Chardalim in Hebrew, and they are petitioning the High Court of Justice to allow them in as well, which will bring about a whole escalation of modesty standards. And in the petition that I filed with colleagues, we have affidavits by feminist religious women, leaders in their communities, saying if these programs will be opened to non-ultra-Orthodox public, our daughters, when they go out on a date for a matching thing, they will be asked, where are you going to study, or where did you study, segregated or non-segregated? And the pressures to become more like observant are going to be something that it'll be very hard for them to resist, even if they want to go to an integrated community. So Anita talked about the workforce, and that I love this question, because the vision that the state of Israel goes to, and it's not that sex segregated is the reason, but sex segregated is a big, it's a, what's the word? For the wheel, the middle.
Hub and spoke.
No.
Hub and spoke?
Or the wedge in?
The whatever, it's like a thing that cuts in the middle. So, notice, and now I'm speaking as a dean, okay? When you need to provide a class for ultra-Orthodox men and a class for ultra-Orthodox...
The thin edge for the wedge.
Thank you. and a class for ultra-Orthodox women, what you never pause and think about is, hey, this class is going to be a whole first degree without meeting Arabs, without meeting secular people, without meeting openly gay people, without meeting single mothers. If you're in the women's side, you are creating a homogeneous experience that does, not only don't you see women, and not only do you have, and that again is the thing I'm telling you, you have a financial power and organizational force to require all sorts of compromises and considerations on the content and on the quality, because the school wants you to graduate, and then you make concessions that you shouldn't make academically. But just think about the cost. We are paying, there is a school in Jerusalem that started off being a sex-segregated school only for modern Orthodox. It's a historical waiver that they got, never mind. And they said, okay, we're going to invite in ultra-Orthodox. You would expect that the ultra-Orthodox men would join the modern Orthodox men, because there's already a class that you're paying for with the teacher and everything for modern Orthodox men. But no, every course in this school is given 4 times, because the mentality is not just a mentality of women's segregation. It's a mentality of this sort of caution on overexposure, too quick an exposure, risky exposure to other ways of life, to other versions of religion, etc., etc. Now I know I'm running out of time, so Let me think what is important that I should say that I haven't said.
You wanted to talk about voting?
Yes, I'll talk about it in a minute. And that will be my conclusion. Oh, yeah. So I talked about multiculturalism before, and usually when you talk about the multiculturalism riddle, you say, is it minority culture, at the expense of women, gays, etc., or is it kind of human rights, individual rights, and that's it. This used to be the discussion in Israel, but no longer. The discussion right now, I call it multiculturalism on testosterone shots. Sorry. And the reason is that culture now is the sanctifier of anything that we have religion in, and there is this outrageous erasure of the price women pay. And what Gilad Malach said about the female professor is a huge demonstration of that. Not only is it simply, it does not matter if it's 70% women in the colleges that he was talking about, but if you as a dean know that you have two candidates, they're both of equal value, one can teach all classes, and one can teach just 70% of the classes. Who will you take? It's as simple as that. Not to mention the huge symbolic damage of making an irrelevant quality that the feminist struggle has tried so hard to say, I'm a professor before I'm a woman, and all of a sudden, no, you're a woman before you are a professor, and this erosion of damage happens in the military, it happens in every other frame of discourse that we're talking about. 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Ono Academic College, which is the private school that teaches the highest number, thousands of ultra-Orthodox students every year, the law school has hosted Chief Justice Aaron Barak. I'm sure many of you have heard of him. And he's sitting there at the edge. I don't know if you can see on the left. This is the men's side on the left, the women's side on the right. And since then, it's still live and kicking. There is a debate on the live debate on the op-ed pages of Haaretz, which covers this issue very faithfully. Barak said something like, when in Rome, I haven't really thought about it. It's not really what I came for. The college said, look, these people have refused to read Barak before, so this is such an achievement. To me, it's very odd that an ultra-Orthodox crowd that knows how to sit separately, if they want, spontaneously in a hall, you need to negotiate, and there was a negotiation, and he wrote about it afterward, the location and the height and the distance from the stage of the divide. But it has also been a devastating moment to the two open proceedings in this issue. One is the one that I stand behind about segregation in higher education. These judges, Supreme Court judges, the former colleague, they look up to him, we all look up to him, so this is a big legitimizing moment. And the other one is on those civil service cadets, which kind of took the discussion in the public sphere one level up. Now I'll speak as an activist, just to close my presentation, and say that a colleague of mine invented a slogan. I'll say it in Hebrew, then in English. In Hebrew, it's Shivyon הוא השבת של הדמוקרטיה, and in English, it's equality is the Shabbat of democracy, meaning just like you can only break the Shabbat rules in case of life danger, life risk, you can only damage equality as a last resort. And the policy of institutions in Israel has been as an automatic first resort. And if you want to see the Shabbat candles on the, you can recognize them. If you want a sticker, I'll give you one later. So this is the kind of the message that we're trying to bring across.
Yoshi, thank you so much. You reminded me of a famous sentence of Richard Thompson Ford from Stanford said that equality is like antibiotics. You can't differentiate between good and bad intentions because they always lead you to be discriminatory. And I think this is an accurate description of the segregated ultra-Orthodox programs. And one short point, I'm a member of the Department of Leadership and Policy in Education at the university, and we have a separate program for soldiers. So Yofi told us about, the importance of heterogeneous discussion. So in this program, we get only a very, very specific group of Jewish Israelis. I inherited, unfortunately, I inherited this program. I'm now the head of the educational management program. So I have one program which is really diverse. We have Arab and Druze and religious, and we also have 3 Haredi students, ultra-Orthodox students. And in the other program, we have, it's the same size actually, because we have a lot of demand for this program, but we have only soldiers. And high-ranked soldiers, because they are not young. They are people who worked several years in the army.
Both
and they
male and female, right? Both
male and female. Yeah, but they're really homogeneous group of people. They came from, the same social fields, and they're interested in the same issues. And it's really something that we should think about, and it's not unusual. We have here in the university programs for example, for CAPS and other programs for soldiers, and we have like many kinds of separate programs, not here just in the University of Haifa, but in other universities as well. So we'll open now the discussion. Thank you.
So interesting, so interesting. One thing I'm wondering is, I don't know if calling it the issue of sex segregation really captures it, because as you said, of course it's not separate but equal. The whole reason for separate is to do it differently, right? So that's what, like the US, you have to at least be separate but equal. The Supreme Court hasn't decided what happens if it actually is separate but equal, sex segregation. But the reason it's so hard to get an example is the reason people sex segregate is usually because they want to do it differently. They want to teach girls about knitting and boys about being an explorer. So I don't know. Obviously, I don't know Hebrew, but I don't know what the right word is. But there's a way in which it's sex segregation, but it's sex segregation to gender divide people, right? So part of it is sex for its own sake, but it's also so they can teach men and women different things and track them into different jobs.
Well, the justification that exists today is about modesty. It's about a woman entering the room is impure thoughts. It's about a female professor. It's just not customary. Males, ultra-Orthodox. It's not even against Jewish law. It's just they won't feel comfortable. You don't go to a female rabbi, you go to a male rabbi, right? So it's not about different. It's not like whatever knitting. It's that's not the rhetoric. The rhetoric is they're simply not used to doing, and they are not used to doing everyday life functions together outside of the home.
Wonder if you could ask for 2 things. First of all, like this is only if you lose on your main point, but one, you could say the rule should be that the same things have to be taught, and women, no class can be open to, like if men have access to the computers, women do. And then the other thing should be only women should be eligible to teach women.
Thank you for that, Jill. Thank you.
Because then there's not an incentive.
I didn't have time to talk about it.
Then there's not an incentive.
No. First of all, say the one thing I don't want is that the petition will end up by the judges saying, okay, let's make sure that the separate are equal. Okay? I don't think that is going to take us anywhere good as a society, because it will institutionalize many other spaces of segregation as a rule, is something that's not suspicious. Again, I also don't think that when a difference is irrelevant for the function that you're making, you just don't make it salient, because that in itself is damaging.
Well, I agree with you. If you lose, what is your
okay? So there is this idea that flies in the air that if we only sorted it, not only, but one way to sort the discrimination out is to have only female professors teach women and only male professors teach men, okay? On its face, I can see why it's appealing. But if I think a little harder, then what I find is that in all honesty, this is a damage to the students. I studied with Aaron Barak at Hebrew U. Why the hell, as a Hebrew U student, I should be banned from the best legal minds as a law student? And why would male students, miss me? I'm such a great professor. No, seriously. So that's one thing. Sorry.
You were the best legal mind.
Exactly. I don't know if Barak is the best legal mind, but or a good legal, better than me. But the other thing is, you again inscribe into a modern system in which sex for employers and for consumers and for students is or supposed to be irrelevant. You inscribe a way of seeing in which the first thing we see when we see a professor is their sex. Now, as a dean, I can tell you that's the third thing that I know that it won't make them hire more female professors. The female professors will be the adjuncts, okay? Because it's not gonna really change anything. And the guy from this college in the Supreme Court said, we want to do it, we simply don't have good female professors out there. And this was like outrageous. Israeli SGDs and PhDs, they're there and they're good and they're great scholars. But also as a dean, if you have a school where there's 25% female on the faculty, and this is kind of more or less the ballgame number, and the female professors have to carry the teaching load first and foremost of the females, even if the female number is equal to the male student number. That means they won't have time to choose what to teach their seminar, to teach this, to teach. The load will be divided such that the few female professors have to teach the rest. As much as it's tempting, I think it's so skewed that my whole...
What are you going to do, if you don't win?
Burn the courthouse.
They have other problems too.
I'm not sure I'll win. I'm not sure this will end anytime soon. It will probably linger for years, this petition. But for me, as much as the issue is trying to win, it's as keeping the issue alive publicly and making the Council of Higher Education work. And these things I'm doing. It's doing it, okay? It keeps the conversation alive, and the Council of Higher Education doesn't do everything that it wanted to do. And it pays a lip service about, somebody said that some of the institutions, the segregation is so extreme that it's not in the same building, it's not in the same days, and in others it's just the classrooms. Nowhere it's just the classrooms. Everywhere it's different gates, different water fountains. This place, the college, the dean complained to a journalist recently, in Israel, have you heard of this? This is really something you should then feel fortunate to be in America. In Israel, every professor has to write 2 exams at the end of the term. Sometimes 2 chances to take the exam, and sometimes if the student is on reserve, you have to write 3 exams at the end of every course you teach. Yeah. So the dean there, said, I don't want to ask my professors to write 4 exams. If I have a male professor who teaches the female students and the male students, the days are different. There's no honor code. Honor code. He has to write 4 exams. So he tried one year to invite them in the same day to the same building, only in different classroom. And the rabbis, not them, the rabbis rebelled. And they said, we're not going to give them permission if you bring them in the same day. So then you can ask yourself, what does that mean for the future? Like, what, they'll graduate and then hopefully, suddenly, oh, now I've seen the light and I can function on an everyday basis with the opposite sex. It just doesn't work like that.
Thank you for what you're doing. This is from a very American, super duper secular, not even observant anything. I said yesterday when this issue came up, and we're going to continue our discussion, Anita and I were former colleagues, good friends, agree about almost everything, having this discussion.
Preliminary debate yesterday.
So you mentioned very quickly my Bible, my Torah, Susan Muller-Oken, is multiculturalism bad for women? And the answer for me is yes. In almost all cases.
Right.
And my quick line, I just want to tell you, is I want to repeat for everyone else. I had an encounter in the United States in a touchy-feely peace mediation group. I was standing next to an Orthodox man, very famous in the United States. He's taught here too, Baruch Bush, who wouldn't hold my hand when we did a peace circle. And the leaders, two Jewish Ashkenazi men, said, "Oh, the answer to this is very easy. Carrie, just move over."
Right.
And I said, in that moment, this is my I want to get a bumper sticker.
Yes.
Feminism is my religion.
Right.
Why does yours trump mine? So this was a classic kind of, in my perspective, male First Amendment American accommodative move that we could all be tolerant if Carrie just moves over and holds the hands of other women and Baruch holds the hands of other men, we've accommodated this. No, we have not. My religion is that I hold the hand of a human being. Sorry, David. You're not Orthodox. His parents are Orthodox, but he is not.
Carry on talk.
Yeah, and so notice when I ask that what that makes me do. I'm, whenever, and so I've been terrible to Baruch every time we're in the same place.
Right.
Hi, Baruch, and on the, you laugh. I told somebody I won't fly LOL, but it doesn't matter because when I've come here before, I've been next to Orthodox men, and I play the game of Albonics.
Yeah.
Some of you play it anyway. If you're in an airplane, we play Albonics with anybody. Who gets control of the armrest? But one of the times I came over here, it's really interesting. My husband and I like the aisle, he likes the window, it was 3 across, and there was an Orthodox man between us, and he had to deal with the fact that he was sitting next to a woman who didn't, accommodate to him.
Right.
My views, I'm on an American airline, you want to do separately, you go to some other place. We don't, El doesn't do separate yet, does it?
No, it doesn't.
No.
I'm
There
going to
was
ask
a
about
case,
that.
yeah.
Because that's
They're
probably
doing
coming.
voluntary,
The bus,
voluntary,
the bus in the
they
sky.
approach you and ask you to move.
So I just want to say that, this is a very American perspective, and it won't work in the Israeli Supreme Court. But I just, like you, I want to say thank you because, as you may know, this is the way the American women's reproductive rights. So a moment of respect for one of my colleagues, Rhonda Copeland, who is a Yale graduate and ultimately a clinical professor at CUNY, who worked on American civil rights issues and then ultimately became an international women's rights lawyer in all the human rights courts in the world. Because she, with great tolerance, didn't necessarily want to export all American human rights and civil rights issues. But when Rhonda began working on the abortion cases with the people that strategized around Griswold, the argument was just what you said. We're not going to win right away. And part of a litigation, and this is, I'm an anti-litigation mediation person, but part of the strategy of a litigation program is education. And I have no idea whether you're going to change anybody's minds, but I just want to say, as an international feminist, thank you if there's anything I can do in my tiny little way. I know Aaron Barak very well. I know he doesn't agree with me. And I just, you're fighting. You're in an international struggle. And when Susan Moller-Oken writes about is multicultural bad for women, it is, we're talking about the ultra-Orthodox Jews, but this is an enormous problem in the Arab world. I was telling Tal at lunch, where I am at the University of California at Irvine, you guys may not know this, is a huge Saudi community in Orange County. And so the law school is right next to the education school. Every morning the law school students come in shorts and flip-flops and no clothes on. It's California, the sun's out all the time. And next door, in almost full burqa, some of the Saudi women are dropped off by their husbands to go to school in a not segregated program. That is, the education program has mostly women, but male students also.
Right.
And they are completely covered, and I appreciate that's their choice. It is so out of place in where we are. So they're, in a way, very brave. They're going to school.
Right.
And they're going to a non-segregated school. And I actually have some hope in that because I believe, and this is the part of, this is temporary, this is the first step. And I believe that whatever happens at home, which I think is not always so pretty in terms of what the husbands are telling their wives they should be doing, there's no question that some of it is, at least a few of those women are going to become feminist teachers in they're getting teaching credentials to teach in girls-only schools in Orange County, California, which, as Noy and I were talking, the big difference, and this is my answer to Anita, talk more, those are private schools they're teaching it. Not public schools.
I don't know that I'll buy that. I don't want to take too much time. I want to hear more questions, but I do want to say something about those micro interactions, like with your calling.
Yeah.
It's I now say two things when I want to, people say, okay, so what do we do? Well, what should we worry about? So one thing I say is our most significant interlocutor is not the ultra-Orthodox, and it's not the religious right. It's the mainstream liberal men in the middle that think of themselves as committed to women's equality. Alon Alair, the Council of Higher Education, the military chief of staff, the state service, all of those people, they think that they're just doing something a little compromise. But the other thing is their mindset is, as opposed, on top of gendered socialization, is what makes Israeli girls, women, to, unlike what you did, and unlike what I did when they told me to cover my shoulders in a studio, in a television, and explaining to me that it's not about principle, it's about consideration, not everything should be such a big deal, but I'm sitting, and this is a story I think will interest you, I'm sitting in a table like that, much better wood and bigger. It was in the top floor of the Kiryat base in Tel Aviv, which is where the chief of staff is sitting. He's conversing with women organizations on women's equality. And he wants to illustrate that he's committed to the issue. And he tells us a story, this was in November, that a former military rabbi came to speak in the cadets course, in the officers course, that is co-ed, okay? And he gave a talk, and during the talk, he felt that something was strange. So he went to the room, and at the end of the room, he found a divide like this one, and behind the divide sat the women. The female soldiers that are going to be officers. Just imagine, the Israeli, strong, opinionated women, educated women that you know, they were sitting behind the divide. And he stopped the talk, and this is the chief of staff, what is this? Why did you do this? I didn't ask for it. And the commanders, like happens more and more, oh, we assumed that that's what you wanted. Now, what also bugs me about this story, apart from all the extra vigilance about his religiosity, is that those women, young women, just did it. They just sat there, and they said, okay, there's a man with a yarmulke coming, I need to sit behind with the divide. And that's like the internalization of I need to be a good girl, this is about unity, this is about religious freedom. It just breaks my heart, and this is what we need to socialize our daughters to see things differently.
So this is adding an element that I'm sure is not immediate, but at thinking at the university level. I come at this from a very different perspective, in that my focal academic thing is children in the law. Mm-hmm. And the basic question for me is differential raising of children, mm-hmm. and whether parents own children. Mm-hmm. And so the second grade is as important to me as mm-hmm. the university, and not only in a gender term, but on this. So if you talk in the United States, the case that got lots of publicity is Yoder and the Amish, and whether the Amish could pull their kids out of school. They pull boys and girls out of school, and there is a whole body of literature about the right of children to sets of opportunities to what they ultimately become that are not gendered but are based in core human things related to where children fit in the world. It raises lots of other complications, but what seemed to me at an academic level there should be discussions across the people who are doing it, on a longer run basis. It is going to become an issue because it can't end at the university level, but it's going to go back to it, and at a social change level, the ideas and frames are inculcated much, much earlier, right. And how you do it. And the flip side is that in some sense, socialization of children is as much an issue for parents as the state, and how you think those through, but I think those sets of arguments are relevant to begin incorporating in all of this.
I don't want to answer on a normative level purely, but I want to say how this question plays out in the campaign that I'm involved in. And it's one of the examples that is given to scare people off is like ad absurdum, you know. Professor Tirosh will petition against the women's part in the synagogue, and then she'll petition against the divide in first grade. This is like the threat that I'll go there. Now, in the political discourse in Israel, this is imaginary, like the idea that the state will come and say to religious communities, you can't segregate in primary school. It's not just about religion, it's about parental privileges, etc., etc. But I also want to say that the way I see it, the one place where this question does wake up and comes into real examination is these days with increasing points of encounter between religious schools that segregate and secular schools that don't. We recently, and I told this over lunch, we recently had two scandals that involved the fact that two schools or many schools meet. Some of them are religious, some of them are secular. And the Ministry of Education says because religious schools are there, the kids must play separately, the girls apart, or watch a theater play where the boys sit in the front and the girls sit in the back. We have other issues like that. Now we had another case recently in the media of when you have youth tournaments, sport tournaments, we have a few co-ed groups, like in basketball, and the regulations of the National Basketball Tournament for Youth is that if your co-ed group plays against a religious boys group, the girls are on the bench. And this is what's happening, okay? But now it's being kind of steered and re-examined, and so we'll see. I think this is from the outside, and the encounters, maybe there'll be like a, internal conversation. Maybe Noya has thoughts about this as well.
I have so many things to say, and I think we are running out of time. So I'll just say several. So first, one of the things we are slightly missing in the discussion is the multiplicity of voices within the community. And what happens when formal public policy promotes segregation, so how this is shaping attitudes, silencing voices of dissent for within. Yofi and also Gilad mentioned this iconic opinion poll that was done in 2016, in which more than 80% of ultra-Orthodox, of a representative sample of the community, declared that they will not attend integrated programs. But then when you read more critically the details of this poll, you realize that once pragmatic considerations enter the discussion, there is a significant gap between the declarative stance and the pragmatic stance. So for instance, when they are asked, are you against integrated programs? So they say, yes, of course. But then you change the question and you ask, and if, for instance, we would offer you a speedy BA program that you know that you could finish in 5 or 6 semesters, but then you would have to take integrated courses. So many say yes, almost 50% yes, we are willing to participate. Alon mentioned the preparatory program of the Hebrew University. I spoke with both of its managers, so it's true that the preparatory program is for men only. It is gender segregated, so the instructors in the class are all male. But then one of the managers of the program is a woman. So if the men need advice They need to consult with somebody about their academic future. It is a woman whom they consult, and this creates no problem. So we need to see this complex process as part of which it's not simply that we are now supporting gender segregation, but we are also promoting and changing habits of participation within the group. I also want to add that, I mean, I listened to Yofi, and I investigated your faces, and it sounds horrible, right? I mean, Israel is perceived like a Western country, and how it can be, right, that religious forces took over, and where is liberalism and everything. But as Yofi said, if you go backwards and understand how it all happened, so this takes you back. I mean, one very important development is the court opinion about the segregated buses that I mentioned. And if you read the problem with this decision, that it employs liberal rights discourse to first to accept the idea that gender segregation is a core component of the identity of the ultra-Orthodox public. And here there is lots of confusion. People think that if they adhere to gender segregation in synagogues, that means that they need gender segregation everywhere. And of course, reality proves otherwise. So the first problem with this opinion is how they conceptualize gender segregation as an inherent component of the group's identity everywhere. And then the second problem is creating this image of voluntary segregation. And if you read the documents of the Council for Higher Education and you listen to people like Gilad Malach, you see how they borrow the rhetoric, the liberal rhetoric. So they say to you, it's voluntary. So if an ultra-Orthodox man and woman, if they don't want to attend these gender segregated programs, they can always attend integrated programs. But of course, they don't understand the kind of pressures that Yofi mentioned, that it's like the bus, right? So an ultra-Orthodox woman is standing in the station and two buses come. One is integrated and the other is segregated, and everybody is watching, and she now has to make a decision whether to board the segregated or the integrated. How can she make a voluntary decision to board the integrated? So once we create all these options, so the pressure is immense. And of course, another thing is to start undermining official narratives about all of this. So the official story is that the first 5-year plan was prepared by the Council for Higher Education in 2011. But if you investigate the field, you realize the gender segregated program started more than a decade earlier. And the ones who initiated these programs were not state agents, but private agents, some members of the community. They thought it is a good way to help their brothers and sisters get some academic education. And others were private actors who were motivated by economic incentives, right? Because they realized that there is a huge financial potential here. And the role of the Council for Higher Education in the first decade was simply to give approval and nothing else. So the whole field developed without clear guidelines, without distinction between right and wrong. And then in 2016, when you conduct a survey poll and you ask people, what do you prefer? What they have in front of them is not a theoretical question, but rather a field that is full with these programs that are already operating. So in addition to trying to employing, the right discourse and challenging this bizarre balance that is currently being done between the right to culture and the right to gender equality, another and supplementary mission is to undermine all the basic assumptions that currently are presented as shaping this project, and as Yofi mentioned, so one theme is the theme of voluntarism that is completely false. One theme is the theme of that everything is temporary, right? This is like a phase and then we'll get there. But of course, quite the opposite happens, because the more programs that you create, the more pressure and on members of the community to join only these programs. And then so people prefer these programs, and then once they enter the workforce, they ask for gender segregated programs. I heard of a colleague who is working for one of the ministries told me in her department they have now a project to recruit ultra-Orthodox women, and they recruited an ultra-Orthodox woman, and she came and she said, I can't sit with a man in one office, so they asked the men to move to another office. So the spread and the spill over to new demands, so rather than temporary, we're achieving quite the opposite. And of course, we need to challenge the question of necessity, which is completely false. Again, the example of the Hebrew University is a really intriguing example, how they only provide the preparatory program. And then ultra-Orthodox know that if they want a real academic degree in one of the prestigious university in Israel, the Hebrew U, they can only do it gender integrated. And all of a sudden there are lots of men willing to do it. And this, in a way, I guess, is a source for optimism in all of this, because until now it was very pessimistic. And the question is, what do we do next? And if, following my original theme about the dynamic aspect of public policies, so we can choose a different track and think how, on what type of policy can push for integration rather than segregations. So of course there are lots of accommodations that needs to be done. Ultra-Orthodox people, many of them graduate from schools that don't provide core studies, so clearly there's a knowledge gap that we need to overcome. So there's lots of assistance, lots of accommodation, and maybe some cultural gaps in the sense that maybe they cannot jump in day one from a totally segregated to a totally integrated environment. We might need to take, do something in between. But what is missing in the whole plan of the Council for Higher Education is this integrative component. So thinking, how do we gradually prepare these people for integrated environment?
To have more comments?
Well, I know we're out of time, but am I wrong to see a connection between, we earlier talked about the Palestinian or the Arab-Israeli conflict. I see a connection between the two, because you have a government that can behave in arguably illiberal ways towards this minority group on the basis of preserving the Jewish state and the Jewishness. And we heard yesterday about there's even discrimination when it comes to abortions based on Jewishness. And to me, it's not a surprise then that in this context, we have this image was powerful, because all I thought about was in the previous presentation they talked about the wall that they built, and this is a wall. Yeah. It's the same people building walls for illiberal reasons. And so, men and women who are Jewish Israelis support illiberalism, arguably, with respect to Arabs. But then now you're victims of this illiberalism from the same group of people for the same religion, but now it's not to your advantage. So I see a connection there. I don't know how you feel about that.
I certainly agree. I think when you talk about the Palestinians, I think that the liberal camp in Israel is united. I mean, everybody agrees and see the illiberal aspect of the separation and the discrimination and the abuse, etc. The problem with gender segregation is that our liberal camp is divided, and some people falsely conceptualize and promote the issue as a proper implementation of a liberal vision, and that's, I think, part of the problem.
It's also a matter of, I'll give a little bit of a roundabout. I did a research with bouncers in clubs, dance clubs in Israel, and I asked them about their modes of thinking and seeing, and then I looked at the cases, and it turns out that the judges, in order to verify that the bouncers saw the client as an Arab or as a Sephardi, the judge needs to tell a story that sounds like a recipe for profiling. He looks dark, his nose is like this, his hair is like that. Just you had those cases with the Native Americans in the 18th century. And one of the things I wondered is, like, why don't the judges themselves, feel like a little awkward to reiterate all this profiling? And the only answer I have is they're used to it. It's done here all the time. You go to the mall, they pretend like they open your bag, but they don't really check my bag. They open my bag, just so that they can pause and see I'm a Jewish woman, and you're supposed to profile everybody in the street today because they might be stabbers, when you have to. So it's such it's something that the eye gets used to. Those you stand here and you stand there, and you show me your ID, and you tell me your demographics, etc., etc. But I think also culturally or aesthetically, it's not just a political. It's that's a solution. Why not? We do that.
Just a comment. I mean, I've been thinking about those sorts of connections since I started coming here. I want to say that I'm old enough that in the 1950s I went to your great state of Virginia to visit Mount Vernon, and seared in my memory was separate drinking fountains. I was growing up in a very liberal, progressive, black and white, growing up in a very liberal, progressive, dare I say, in the United States, communist household. My father was in the same communist cell as Paul Robeson in the early 1940s, when, some of you may not know, the Communist Party was in fact not illegal in the United States. The Russians were our colleagues in World War II, remember, for a little history. And that image of the separate bathrooms and the separate drinking fountains was seared in my head. So when we all try to talk about what equality is, I have a lot of problems with what equal treatment is, because people are different and what is equal. But inequality is very clear to me. So it's like, I don't know what health is completely, because, you have to be totally the right weight and the right whatever, but I know what ill health is. And so there is something about those, and that's what those segregation walls do to me in every place that they are. There is something that says we are drawing a line, and whatever the reason for the line is, you are different, and Plessy, whatever. I've just never thought that lines that say, you can come here and you have to go over there, there's something completely wrong with that. I don't have the answers for how we make equality. I said I don't think they're equal concepts. I think inequality it's very clear what that is when it is in the world, and it really bothers me. And so that's why I want to, now here's my really provocative thing. So I'm obsessed with the fact, you guys will know the movie, there was this fabulous Israeli movie about an Orthodox father who couldn't use a cell phone, and his child winds up dying by wandering into the sea. You don't know this film. It was shown here very briefly. It's an Israeli film. The Lord is our Father, or something like that. The Law of the Fathers? It's something like that.
I don't remember.
It's an incredible film, because the father's so busy praying that he goes with his fellow congregants, and they go to the sea somewhere in Tel Aviv, I suppose, although there's nobody around. And the little boy wanders off because he's so busy praying. This is clearly a Israeli critique of Orthodox behavior, clearly. I mean, that's probably why it didn't show here very much. And the little boy wanders into the sea, and he drowns. And when the father realizes that he has lost his son, he actually desperately looks for somebody else on the beach to grab his cell phone. I know about the rules about it. In an emergency, you can violate many of the Shabbat rules. But it was very, very profound. And of course, what the film does to me is I say, now where is it written anywhere in the Torah or the Quran or anywhere about smartphones and cell phones? So the great Talmudic and Quranic scholars are doing exegesis of the texts to find in some old piece of doctrine interpretations of the modern world. And I just have trouble, I'm just raising that. This is like really profoundly provocative because I just, and I appreciate all the religious people will try to defend their reading of the text to justify these interpretations of how something that was written thousands of years ago somehow is binding on the current world. And at lunch, I was describing the course that I taught on Uber law a couple of years ago, which was about what I said earlier. There's new things happening in the world. The platform economy can't be regulated, in my view, by conventional conceptions of contracts and torts. There's new things, and there's new harms, and there's new injuries, and we can try to assimilate them to contracts and torts and civil procedure, personal jurisdiction, but some of it is actually different. And so, you're not going to argue this to the Israeli Supreme Court. I mean, I just have trouble with fundamentalism, basically, I think, that says we must interpret modern life solely through these doctrinal sources. And that way I agree with Mike, I'm sure, that I also feel when I watch the Orthodox communities in Los Angeles and I see little kids who are being so heavily socialized into old doctrines that I wonder what kind of freedom is there for children in a so-called free society. When do they get to see something else? So
help.
Yeah, so it's profoundly.
This is sounding like anti-religion,
I'm sorry,
and we're not going to get anywhere if we turn this into religion against anti-religion, because these people.
Oh, I know that.
It's a question of legal pluralism. That's not really about culture, legal pluralism. De facto, in practice, many of these people respect their leaders, and if they tell them to go or not to go, they will obey. Now, the state should not respect them if you have a monism, because, right of these learned, long-bearded people to say what should happen. But in practice, they do. They do about army service, and you risk another one of the battles over going to university. So, even if you had all the rights in the world, and I'm entirely on your side emotionally, in terms of analysing it, I think you have to avoid, where you're now, where you end up saying, look, how can they even believe in these things? I mean, this is not going to create, take from a mediator, anything like any prospect, anything like so you hear the first speaker who was the compromiser, we'll compromise, and then you worry terribly where this compromise will lead, and it will get established over time, it will not get easier. I think you're right. I don't think it's a compromise which those on the other side want to be temporary. What will happen will happen. The fact that people, when they're exposed to the wider world, many, chozrim b'she'elah, there's a phrase in Hebrew of people who, perhaps quite a lot on the secular side, suddenly see religion, they return to repentance. But the word for repentance in Hebrew has a double meaning, also means answers. So luckily there are also people from the religious world who see there's maybe good things in the more secular world, or shall we say, many people here may be religious, in a world which is more open-minded, shall we say, and they're called chosem b'shila, they return to questions. So we want, as academics, people to have questions, to question. These are often illiberal societies in the sense that they think they have the answers, and they don't believe in individual rights, they believe in community, as you say, following tradition, which is divinely given, so there's not much argument to make, since divine laws have to be interpreted also for smartphones, the guys with long beards get to do it, and they're respected because they've got to that position by exemplary behaviour within their community. So the real issue is how to keep the guys with long beards on board, not to convince the Supreme Court that anyway is increasingly being attacked politically for being seen as more on the side of liberty. If we want to be provocative, that would be my, So I'm not against anything you're doing, but my worry practically is that if the rhetoric that accompanies it is anything like what Perry offered us.
But I have to say that I am fully with you on, not just as a rhetorical or political instrument, as an analytical observation. I do not think that the schism is between secular and religious. Some of the best allies are religious. Many of them are religious women, but they are religious. And I also oftentimes, you know, people in talks, etc., they start talking about the false consciousness and the victimhood of ultra-Orthodox women. And I then come out with a spontaneous list of how we, the free women, are operating out of stress of whatever, cosmetic conventions, and how our leaders in our side of the equation still have a long way to go in terms of keeping us equal. So it's not just that we have to like save the brown women. There are challenges in both communities. And I even correct journalists when they say that it's about the process of Israel becoming more religious. This issue, I call them up and I say, no, sorry, you know, this is about, you know, like people committed to human rights and they can be religious and they can be non-religious. But as to what to do about it, I don't think I have any access to the many long beards, as you call them. The only people I have access to are people, the policymakers, the people that do the budgets and the institutions and the compromises in the general society. And I also agree that going to court should have been the last resort. I went to court after 2 years trying to wake up a public discourse, doing conferences, writing op-eds, doing this, doing that, inviting the Council of Higher Education to every forum that I initiated.
Don't interrupt you, but I'm on your side. So,
no,
it's not public opinion polls you need. It's an opinion of one guy with a long beard who says you're right. That's what you need, not the public opinion, which doesn't count for religion.
But I don't have access to them. All I have is maybe the chief of staff, the chief of staff guy. Maybe he can talk to the guy with the long beard, and all I can do is talk to the chief of staff. And I also, again, I don't expect much of the court, and you're right that I'm putting him between a rock and a hard place these days. But as one person or as a group of, really small group of activists with no money, all I can do is what I can do. I don't have soldiers, I don't have armies. People tell me, go and do revolutions, and the University of Haifa was, you know, like, now reconsidering this whole issue. It's like, go for it, babe. Do it. What do you want from me? It's one of those things when you, as somebody who's worried about stopping and worrying change, when you think, okay, what are my venues? The venues that I have are only the venues that I have. You know, and a court petition is a powerful one.
I think I've said it's intended as criticism.
Anita wanted to say something.
Oh, we could go on all day, couldn't we? This conversation. I feel that that Noya and Yofi won the debate today over the people on the telephone.
But not in reality. We're losing.
But in terms of the arguments made, and observations made, the facts given, I think that that I am 100% on your side. I feel like you made a very, very compelling case for why we should be very reluctant to see gender segregated schools in Israel.
Just one footnote before I continue?
Yeah.
To say that, just like I said before about the politics of Israel in general, on this issue, because most of my colleagues are not like shocked, I think a mirror from their colleagues abroad, a mirror of shock, tell me what is going on in your school, what is going on in your academic country, what is my university or my community is, donating money to your university and you're sex segregated. I think you guys have a role there to reflect the shock. to reflect what you think, because there's no consciousness of this.
So I was not even aware there was a serious movement towards this in the at the university and college level. So I'm shocked that I didn't know, and now I will take back and mirror the shock. Okay, but I want to just say a couple of things that kind of go to this issue about well, what about in the quote-unquote private sphere? How do we have our attitudes, and how do we accept religious differences and multiculturalism and so forth? This image reminded me of the one Orthodox wedding I went to in Brooklyn, New York, and the bride was a PhD student in psychology, and the groom was a law student, my student. And we had the sex-segregated wedding hall, but the father is the mother of the doctor. Everyone's wealthy, it's beautiful, but the band was on the men's side, right? So we're on the we're on the women's side. The band's on the men's side. We have can we hear the music barely? But so this was in a way an amusing, but again very deeply disturbing image of how what I thought was acceptable in a wealthy, well-educated, men and women are all kind of equal in the outside world kind of private family thing becomes outrageous, when transferred into education. It's not, the wall should not be there. The distinguished guest should not be on the men's side. There should be no men's side.
Sure.
On the other hand, I think that this thing about the public and the private, so in the US, I had become something of an annoying person for some of my feminist friends because I have defended to some extent maybe what might be considered multiculturalism in the context of my country. So for example, I've written a paper arguing that in America, forget about Belgium or UK or France or Turkey, we should be very tolerant of niqab, hijab, and burqa in public places. Why? Because I don't think that the feminist analysis which applies to Iran or Turkey or even France applies to the United States. There was a woman who tried to go to court to sue a rental car company that she felt cheated her out of $300, and the judge said, you can't come into my courtroom wearing that thing on your head. He refused to let a woman come into court because she covered her hair. Yeah. A mother wants to go to jail to visit her son in jail. The jailer says, prison guard says, you can't come into jail because you're wearing niqab. So there are very practical solutions to these kinds of problems, if there are problems at all. I mean, I don't think hijab in a civil court is a problem at all. Maybe, burqa or niqab in a prison is an issue, but you can have a woman pat down the woman and let her go see her son. But it's funny because I think we are in my country sometimes so intolerant of minority perspectives that we don't take the slightest responsibility or gesture toward accommodation. So I am, again, 100%, I think, today, thank you, behind this idea that in the context of higher education in Israel, we should be very reluctant to see going down the path of segregation. But doesn't mean that I don't think that in the United States we couldn't be way more tolerant of religious minorities like the Amish, Jews, Muslims, the Mormons, the Seventh-day Adventists, the extreme right-wing Baptists, and so on and so on and so on.
Anita, I have to say two things. One, it's not the same price. Sorry, I have to. It's not the same price. The price of being tolerant to a niqab or a hijab is not a price of let's move the female professor aside.
Exactly,
okay?
Yes.
That's one thing. And the other thing is that the niqab or the hijab works in an typical American general space, completely different from an ultra-Orthodox garb, which is how my grandparents look like. This is my culture in a way. The guilt of not being religious is what moves so many politicians because they feel, okay, that's how our great-grandparents lived in Europe. I don't do that. Let me respect that. It doesn't, there are no issues of whether you can wear a yarmulke, whether you can wear a wig. It's not the issue. Of course you can. Welcome. The issue is opposite, whether I can enter like that to a religious space. So the dynamic is completely...
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. And I think that some of my work has tried to show that in the United States, women have it badly on both sides. If we're too modest, we get criticized by the courts. If we're not modest enough, we'll get criticized by the courts, right? So we want to dance naked? No, put on some clothes.
Right.
We want to cover up? No, take off those clothes.
Right.
So the state controls how our bodies. We're not in control of our bodies. The state controls our bodies. And for a feminist, I think that's the important point of view.
Right.
That's the important point of view, that we are not in control of our own bodies, and we have to work hard to get control of our own bodies, whether that means covering up or taking off.
Right,
Yes.
right.
I know you want to stop. I have to say
No,
one thing.
I just wanted to ask if anyone has more comments. We'll collect comments, and then Noya wanted to say something.
Just for, so you and I are going to, I wish we're in the same plane, we're going to argue.
We can
on the
argue
way
at home. We don't have to
Because
do it
I
here.
teach, as I said earlier, international law is now a required course, and I do bailing cases with first-year law students in a pretty diverse class, so we argue about all of this. So the only thing I want to throw in, Anita and I will talk about the United States separately. I spent a lot of time teaching in other countries, and last year when I was doing the graduation speech at Leuven in Belgium, I, who think I know a lot about these issues, had a very prominent Belgian female executive of a bank tell me that one of the issues that's going on with the increasingly Muslim community in Belgium is that she has observed that the extent to which more women are covering up, there is a bleeding, in her view, a bleeding of anti-feminist culture from the increasingly Arab community into the absolutely, Euro Union capital of EU in Brussels. And she saw, it was extraordinary to me. This is a practical banker, not an academic feminist theorist at all. And she said to me, do you feminist theorists talk about the fact that the increased covering up and lumping them together, the increased covering up and segregation of women in other religions, not her Christian Belgian Catholicism, is actually, in her view, affecting the way her Euro white male colleagues were beginning to see her as a woman. So I just throw that in as yet another complex, where's David, comparative, complex multicultural issue. I mean, that just blew me away, actually, the notion. I mean, who would have thought that the dominant Christians in Europe were, we all know that they are obviously complaining about migration and all kinds of other people in their Euro-Christian cultures. Nevertheless, she perceived that the increased tolerance, and Belgium has a form of sécularité like France does, but she said it wasn't being enforced like it was in France, so that there was increasingly veiling of all kinds, and she said it was a way of making women very prominently different from men. And in her view, it's a little bit of the spillover effects is what you're talking about, Noya. The things that seem like they're temporary or just over here, or we're going to allow covering up. And she says it is seeping into the Euro culture as well. I just throw that in as a highly, incendiary. So I look for it now, since she pointed it out to me.
Does anyone else?
So you still have patience? So I have something, going back to the image, I mean, the man with the beard with whom we should initiate a dialogue and recruit him to our side. So I just wanted to let you know that when I made this research about how the segregated buses developed, I discovered that in the late 90s, when there were no segregated buses, and one of the central public bus companies in Israel was invited by the leaders of the community to start operating such buses, they conducted a survey. So they invited members of the community and asked them about segregated buses. And they were really surprised to learn that most members of the community opposed segregated buses. They were accustomed for decades to board and to regular buses, and especially women, not out of feminist concerns, but ultra-Orthodox women, they have lots of children. Most of their life they are pregnant, at least in certain periods of their life. So they would rather sit in the front because of daily sicknesses, and they have lots of children, so they wanted assistance from their partners. So they said, no, we don't want segregated bus system. The bus company put this survey aside, because the leaders of the community promised they told them there will be a real financial reward here. Once you start operating these buses, we will tell our community members to board only your buses. And so the whole community will use your buses. And that's how it all started. And a decade later, you came to a bus stop, and people boarded in segregation. And also, when you ask people, there was a new generation there. They didn't know the generation, how it was before. They were all accustomed that this how public transportation works, and they all support it. So, and when I was writing now my other piece on the gender segregated programs, I spoke with an ultra-Orthodox woman who she herself studied in an integrated program, but she's married and older. She told me of her sister who also studies in an integrated program. She's 26, she's not married. She has a problem finding a match because she disobeyed the community rules. So when we decide, what I'm trying to say, that when we are deciding on a certain multicultural policy, it's not simply observing the cultural space of the other and responding. It is actually choosing between positions and disagreements within what is in fact a very diverse community. And once we choose, we actually strengthen certain forces within the community and silence completely other forces. And as we strengthen some forces, it's becoming more and more difficult for the other forces to express dissent or disobey. So it's really about, it's such a complicated issue in the sense that at the end of the day, multicultural liberal policy has to ask, which voices we listen to, with whom we cooperate within the group. And this is never, this issue is we're so blind to this issue, as usually our perception of culture and religious is so monolithic in the sense that we assume that they are all the same. They're not all the same. And usually the weaker segments of the community are the ones who need us more for assistance.
So I know we want to end. We need to talk to the courts, the men with the long beards, and the ultra-Orthodox women, which I know Noya has been doing within the ultra-Orthodox community. They also need to be empowered to have
and
different
Israeli
views.
Women in general.
Yeah, and all. Yeah. Well, women everywhere in the whole world, as long as we're doing that. No, seriously, these are multi-conversations. But I know what you're doing, Noya, and it's. It's
couldn't
really
agree more with what
so
was
it's
just
we're
said.
not talking only to the men with the long
You
beards.
mustn't reify culture. You're right, and if you choose one, then you give it more power. What I meant was, just because it's multiple, those within the Orthodox world will tell you there are different voices. There can be incredible space for different interpretations because it's not the fundamentalist religion, because actually the texts keep having to evolve over time. And actually, sometimes you go back and you find, before it was much more lenient, same in Islam, things were much more lenient at certain points. So with a creative authority, you can find support for positions. So that's what I'm suggesting. Whereas if you sort of take the line, I know you're not wanting to, but take the line that group, exactly what the opposite of what you said, that group stands for something and we have to fight them in court, then you avoid the possibility of precisely discriminating and strengthening that opinion within that group, which is more near to yours, who will have a following, maybe not the main following in that group, but there will be. Help me, Is that right?
Yeah, this is exactly right. And we have programs in Tel Aviv University, at the Hebrew University, that are integrating Haredim, ultra-Orthodox students in regular programs. And the people that are going to these programs are supported by, local rabbis, people from the periphery of Israel, not Bnei Brak in Jerusalem, but other places. And this is exactly the same about schooling. When they teach like the core curriculum, so they are supported by local rabbis, from people like outside the center of politics and power, and they find like the people with the long hair that we can talk to. So thank you all for a long and interesting panel. And Karin, when do you want to start the next panel? Do you want to say?
It's at 4. We're going to start at 4, and then we're going to enjoy a coffee break. I know you will need it. I saw, so help yourself, guys. And thank you so much for an enlightening conversation. And thank you. And even for the absent males who also, raised some counterpoints.
Those males were ultra-Orthodox.
If you have more,
I mean,